So I'm here with Dr. Jillian Smith of Worcester Polytechnical Institute here. Now, Dr. Smith, you have a doctorate in computer science, but you are also involved in gaming, and you are also involved in AI research, which is the main reason I wanted to talk to you.
Yep, that's all correct. I direct the Interactive Media and Game Development Program here at WPI.
So in the past couple of weeks here on the Pike, on the morning show anyway, we've been talking a lot about Chat GPT and AI, and just it seems like it's coming on very quickly. And, not just like for people looking to write up questions or job applications or proposals or things like that, but I've seen photographs that AI has altered. Probably the most striking one I saw recently was one of former President Obama, Martin Luther King Jr., and Abe Lincoln standing together while Martin Luther King was taking a selfie of all three of them. It's incredible. Yeah. And it wasn't chintzy, Photoshop. I mean, this looked amazing. And then another incredible thing I heard was a friend sent me a thing where someone had written had Chat GPT write songs in the style of the Beatles. And then somehow their voices were sampled and had a couple of snippets of songs that sounded like the Beatles.
Yep.
This makes me very, very paranoid just about life in general. How can we address concerns about AI taking over things, not just jobs, but just taking over? Is that going to be a problem with this technology?
It's creepy, right? Like a lot of the stuff that we're seeing is really, really creepy. And I think step one is probably acknowledging that we're needing to have some real conversations now about what's true and what's not true. How do we understand what these systems are capable of doing and not capable of doing? Even just over the weekend, I was listening to some final projects from some students in my class, and one of them did this AI-generated podcast with like AI-generated music and AI-generated script and AI-generated interviews with like Queen Elizabeth and stuff like that. Yeah. And they were doing it in an attempt to kind of show how easy it is to create these fake broadcasts. And my 7-year-old son walks in and he's like, "Mom, why are you listening to the news?" I'm like, "I'm not. It's not real." Right? And it's like, right. So now I'm having this conversation with my 7-year-old about how do you tell if something's real or not, right? Because in his mind, he's like, "Oh, it sounds like NPR or whatever," right? So clearly it must be real. So yeah, I think step one is understanding what's possible. And the reality is it's possible to make fake images now and fake voices and fake video and fake script. And that's scary, right? And I don't want to downplay the fact that that's scary. That said, kind of the history of these kinds of technologies coming into the public sphere is one where we worry for a long time that it's going to take over, right? Yeah. And then we start to find the boundaries of what they can and cannot do. So this conversation is a conversation that people were having about Photoshop when Photoshop came out, right? And now you described it as chintzy, right? Like you can tell if something's been Photoshopped or not. But for years, people actually weren't very good at telling if something had been Photoshopped or not. And there are some like tells of this kind of software still, and some sort of like it feels robotic because it is robotic sort of tells to generated text as well. That I think over time people will start to get better at being able to detect if we know that that's a thing that can be done.
Well, what are some of the weaknesses? And I'm asking this with the angle, I'll call it the Death Star angle, right? The Death Star was this huge thing in Star Wars, but it had that one little weakness. Is there something that AI or Chat GPT, like you were saying, there's going to be ways we can tell? What are some of those ways? Have we found those yet? Because from the stuff, the little I've been exposed to, it all seems pretty real.
Yeah, so there's a few obvious tells right now, and then some of it is kind of like a need for repeated exposure, and you start to get a sense of what feels generated and what doesn't. With generated images, especially images of people, hyper detailed aspects of anatomy, these systems are not typically very good at replicating. So hands, teeth, hair, like those are things that if you kind of like zoom in on the image and look really closely, you'll be like, that does not look like a human hand. sometimes on generated images, you'll see hands that have 6 fingers or hands that have 5 fingers, but one of them is like really weirdly shaped. In generated text, with ChatGPT especially, its training data only goes up through, I want to say like the end of 2021. And so it won't be able to refer to more recent public events with any kind of accuracy. ChatGPT tends to generate text that feels very like corporate in a way, like it's sort of stiff and formal. And that sort of tone moves into a lot of the things that it generates. Like if you ask it to generate a podcast script or something, it'll feel very like aloof. But it's harder to tell some of that.
Well, that's something that I want to ask you as a teacher. How do you deal with students now with this? Because, you know, with the internet, they were able to go online and maybe find a paper. How do you as a teacher deal with something like that?
Oh, everyone's still trying to figure out how to deal with that. So they have these GPT detectors that are totally unreliable. So you can't really rely on many like automated detectors of like, was this written by an AI or not? ChatGPT will fabricate references.
Just like a real student?
Not even that. Like it'll very authoritatively describe a book that doesn't exist.
Okay.
And so it'll have in there, like, you know, as written in, you know, this book by this person, and then you go and look it up and that book doesn't exist.
Huh.
Because it's generating text that mathematically should be true. So again, I think in terms of dealing with student work, like some of it is reading submitted work critically, right? And again, you can kind of tell if it's been generated by an AI sometimes, but not all the time. Some of it, I think, is a longer-term change that's going to be coming in higher ed as we look at what is it that we want the students to be learning, and when can tools like ChatGPT be reasonably used as tools, and when is it not okay to use them, and how do we communicate that, and how do we make sure that, you know, students and faculty together are having conversations about the software so that students understand when it can be used and why, and faculty can understand why students are feeling incentivized to use it, and then how to sort of remove the incentive almost to want to use it.
I'm paranoid, so I've given all this stuff like we got to watch out, we got to watch our backs, we got to see if something's fake. But at the same time, much like advances in technology like this, there are actual useful applications for AI and ChatGPT that can help people, like in the medical field, right?
To some extent, probably yes. I think if it's being critically understood by the doctors. So where my paranoia comes in actually is some uses in the medical field, because these systems will bake in all of the biases that are in the underlying training set. But definitely, you know, there are some interesting projects in, you know, can you use AI to detect from images if wounds have been infected, right? Or so some things that maybe have like clear right and wrong answers. I'm not an expert in medical AI by any stretch of the imagination, but yeah, I do think we will end up finding a bunch of really useful applications for this kind of software. So I hear stories about people talking to ChatGPT as a therapist, right? Like that freaks me out.
Yes, that's very scary. Yes.
And I understand that it's happening in response to like a large mental health crisis.
Yeah, there's a lot of lonely people.
Like, access to doctors, there's a lot of lonely people. It's really hard. I just heard a story the other day on someone who's created an app for like helping people with small talk on first dates. And I'm
yes.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
I personally have found it harder to write since the pandemic, right? Of like having the brain space and the time to sit down and go from a blank page to something new. Like that feels like a lot some days, and it's pretty tempting to use ChatGPT to do it for me, or at least to give me a first pass at it. So maybe some of that's what's happening too.
That's my biggest concern. One is the control and creation of information, and two, just making us dumber, you know, like doing stuff like, you know, Orwell kind of had that thing where, you know, it was in 1984, they were shrinking the dictionary, you know, and just making people dumb so they're easily manipulated. And I see some of that happening. That's been happening already over the past couple of decades. And that's my biggest concern is like, well, I'll just have ChatGPT do it, or I'll have AI do it. And then next thing you know, nobody knows how to write anything. I'm
Yep.
sure that'll take a while, but it shouldn't be happening. Those are my biggest
I'm
fears.
not sure if it's going to take that long. Yeah, I don't know if you've seen, there was a comic going around sometime early at the beginning of ChatGPT, and it was a little flow chart. And it was the author of the email on one side saying like, hey, ChatGPT, generate the email that says like, I want this job and here's my resume.
Yeah.
Right. And then on the other side, there was the person receiving the email saying, hey, ChatGPT, synthesize this long email that I just got. And the synthesis was, Bob wants this job. Right. And the middle was, like the generation of the flowy formal language of like, to whom it may concern, it is my delight to apply for this job. Right. What I like, the formal thing that we all have to write.
Yeah.
And on the one hand, I'm like, God, that's kind of useful, right? Like, because, when you go into writing some of these sort of formulaic, cover letters and things, like, it's kind of formulaic, right? So wouldn't it be great if an AI could write it?
Mm.
But on the other hand, I think we're forgetting why the thing exists, right? Like, why do we have these cover letters?
Right.
Why is it important to be able to demonstrate that you have, like, a capacity for kind and polite human communication, right? And I worry about losing that we're seeing so many things as formulaic, that
absolutely.
we lose the understanding of why we have to do them.
Yeah. I mean, you're absolutely right, because you could look at the cover letter right away and say, okay, this person's very creative and stands out from the hundreds of applications I got. Or you could just say, well, this sounds pretty dry. I don't know. I'll pass on this. So, well, listen, I appreciate your time. I know you're busy. It's the end of the year over there at WPI, but Dr. Jillian Smith, thank you so much for your insights on this. You eased some of my concerns, and at the same time, you've elevated some of my concerns. So it's just a matter of being vigilant and maybe once in a while doing it yourself instead of letting the computer do it. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you very much.